Hello everyone, I'm myself Dr Dipti and today we'll discuss about reflex action. Starting with the definition, what is reflex activity? Reflex is an involuntary motor response to sensory stimulus. Involuntary motor response to sensory stimulus. Okay. One of the example of reflex activity is, suppose you have placed your hand on hot object. You immediately withdraw your hand. So that is a reflex action. Now, what are the components of reflex arc? Reflex arc has mainly five components. Number one, that is receptors. Receptors or sensory receptors, they receive information, they receive the stimulus, and they generate impulse or action potential in response to stimulus. Second is afferent nerve, which is also known as sensory nerve. It transmits sensory impulses from the receptor to center. Third, that is center, which is generally located in the central nervous system, that receives sensory information and it generates motor response. Then efferent nerve, which is also known as motor nerve, which transmit motor impulses from center to the effector organ. And effector organ, that is either it is a muscle or gland or any other tissue that gives response. So these are the five components of reflex arc. Now, in certain reflex arc, we have got connected neurons, which are also known as internuncial neurons or interneurons. They connect between afferent and efferent, or you can say sensory and motor neurons, either directly to the center or we require this kind of connections. Now, we classify reflexes. Reflexes are classified by five different ways. Number one, that is depending on the development. We will discuss one by one. Second, that is depending on the situation of the center, depending on the function, depending on number of synapses and clinical classification. We'll discuss one by one. First one, that is depending on the development. There are two types of reflexes. Number one, that is unconditioned reflex, which is also known as they are also known as inborn reflexes. They are present since birth. Okay, we need not to allow the subject or allow the animal to learn it. So they are inborn or unconditioned. Conditioning, that is learning, which is not required. So unconditioned reflexes. For example, suppose if you place a drop of honey on tongue of a newborn baby, then there is salivation. So that is a natural reflex, that is inborn. By birth, this reflex is present. So many other reflexes are also there, that is like suckling reflex, grasping reflex, they all are present since birth. So that is in unconditioned reflex group. Second, that is conditioned reflexes or acquired reflexes. We require to learn them. For example, suppose if you have heard about your favorite dish, then you have salivation. There is no connection between hearing and salivation. But because of learning, you know the taste of the particular dish, you have salivation. So either because of hearing, or you sight, or smell, or thought of your edible substance, that produces salivation. Why there is salivation? Because it is a learned reflex. We know the test. So depending on the development, reflexes are of two types: unconditioned reflexes or inborn reflexes, and second, that is conditioned or acquired reflexes. Second, depending on the situation of center, where the center is situated. So they are cerebellar reflexes. Okay, center is there in the cerebellum. Most of the postural reflexes, locomotor reflexes, they are cerebellar reflexes. Cortical reflexes, higher centers are there in the cortex. So learning, memory, for that reflexes are there in the cortical cortex. Midbrain reflexes, writing reflexes are present in midbrain. Writing reflexes. Medullary reflexes, respiratory and cardiovascular centers are there in the medulla. So their regulation centers are reflexes are there in the medulla. Spinal reflexes, in spinal cord we have reflexes for the withdrawal movement. We have reflexes for locomotion. So depending on the center, where the center of reflex arc is located, reflexes are either cerebellar, cortical, midbrain, medullary, and spinal reflexes. So this is second way of classification. Third, depending on the function. Two types of reflexes are there. One, that is protective reflex or flexure reflexes. They are, as we know, withdrawal reflexes. Withdrawal, when you are withdrawing your hand from somewhere. So that is withdrawal reflex when painful or harmful stimulus is given. There is withdrawal. Always withdrawal is flexure response. Okay. So that is flexure or protective reflexes. And second are extensor reflexes. They are also known as anti-gravity reflexes or postural reflexes. To maintain the posture, we have to protect the body against gravitational force, and that is made by extension of commonly lower limb. So these are extension reflexes. So three classifications we have completed. One, that is depending on the development. They are inborn or unconditioned and conditioned reflexes depending on the situation of center. They are located either in the cerebellum, cortex, medulla, midbrain, and spinal cord. Depending on the function, they are protective or flexure reflexes and anti-gravity or extension reflexes. Then, depending on the number of synapses, they are monosynaptic reflexes and polysynaptic reflex. Monosynaptic reflex means here in the reflex arc only one synapse is present between afferent and efferent nerve. So that is monosynaptic reflex. Your stretch reflex, that is basic reflex, basic postural reflex, stretch reflex, that is monosynaptic reflex. And polysynaptic reflexes, you can see multiple synapses are present here. And withdrawal reflexes, they are polysynaptic. How? Suppose if you are withdrawing your hand, okay, so you are causing you perform flexion of this hand and simultaneously extension of the opposite hand to support. So flexures of this side of the limb, they are stimulated, and extensor of the opposite side. So multiple synapses are there. Therefore, it is known as polysynaptic reflex. Fifth classification, very important one, that is clinical classification. That is, according to this classification, reflexes are of four types. One, that is superficial reflexes. Superficial reflexes means they have center superficially. Superficial reflexes, they have receptors superficially. Receptors. Okay. So these reflexes are initiated when we are stimulating surface of the body. Deep reflexes, they have receptors just beneath the skin. Visceral, they have receptors present in the viscera. And pathological, they are not normally present. Okay, we will discuss one by one. So starting with the superficial reflex. This reflexes you are supposed to perform in your practical class also, as well as clinically also. This topic is very important. In all the reflexes, you must know your how to perform the reflex, what would be the response, your afferent nerve center and efferent nerve. We will discuss one by one. So superficial reflexes, as I told you, if receptors are located superficially in the skin and subcutaneous tissue, the reflex is known as superficial reflex. This superficial are again divided in two groups. One is cranial reflex, because the center in the brain, and spinal reflex centered in the spinal cord. Okay, spinal reflex. So first we'll discuss about cranial superficial, that is corneal stimulus. Here we are irritating cornea. Okay, this is cornea, we are irritating, and the response is blinking of the eye when you are trying to touch cornea with a wisp of cotton. Okay, there is blinking of eyelid, your upper eyelid blinks. Okay, afferent nerve, that is by fifth cranial nerve. Trigeminal nerve center is located in the bones, and efferent by seventh cranial nerve, that is facial nerve. Then conjunctival reflex. Here, same thing is little bit different. You have to touch conjunctiva. Okay, try to irritate conjunctiva with the help of wisp of cotton. The response would be blinking of again eye, afferent nerve, fifth cranial nerve, that is trigeminal center in the bones, and efferent, that is seventh cranial nerve. Next, superficial cranial reflex, that is pharyngeal and uveal reflex. Here you have to touch pharynx or uvula. This is uvula with the help of either spatula or some other hard material. Okay. So when you are touching or you are irritating pharynx and uvula, what would be the response? That is gagging reflex. Gagging, like nauseating feeling, and raising the uvula. Uvula is raised upward. Afferent nerve, that is your ninth cranial nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve. Center, that is center for the vagus nerve is the center, 10th nerve center, nucleus. Okay, and efferent, that is again 10th vagus nerve. So that is pharyngeal uveal. So these are your cranial superficial reflexes. I repeat: corneal reflex, conjunctival reflex, because centers are located in bones in the brain, and pharyngeal uveal reflex. Then abdominal reflexes, they are superficial spinal reflex. Here centers are located in the spinal cord. Here the stimulus is you have to give a stroke on the abdominal wall, and you can see there is ipsilateral same side contraction of the abdominal muscle like this. You can give stroke like this, and muscle contracts. Response is contraction, ipsilateral contraction of abdominal muscle. And afferent fiber, that is from T6 to T12. There are three segments: upper, middle, and lower. So upper, that is T6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. Center again, spinal cord T6 to T12. Efferent now, that is again T6 to T12. Motor. Then plantar reflex. Here, with the help of pointed end of the hammer, you have to scratch. You have to give a stroke on the sole like this. Starting from the sole, and you have to reach to toe like this manner, this way, here, like this. And what would be the response? Normal response is plantar flexion. Very important, try to remember plantar flexion and adduction of all the toes. Okay, this is normal plantar reflex. Afferent nerve, that is L5, S1, S2. Center again in the L5, S1, S2, and efferent L5, S1, S2. Okay. Then comes deep reflexes. Superficial we have completed. I repeat, superficial divided in cranial and spinal. Cranial is corneal, conjunctival, and pharyngeal and uveal. Spinal, they are abdominal and plantar reflex. Okay, now we move to deep reflexes. Deep reflexes, again they are cranial, spinal. Deep cranial reflex, that is jaw jerk. Stimulus is ask the subject to slightly open the mouth, and you have to give a stroke on the chin, middle of the chin here. Slightly ask the subject to slightly open the mouth, and you have to give a stroke. And the response would be closure of the mouth. Okay, and here afferent fibers, that is by fifth cranial nerve, efferent, that is also by fifth, and center, that is in the bones. Then biceps jerk. Here, this is again now, this is spinal, deep spinal reflex. Stimulus is with the help of hammer. You have to give a stroke on the biceps tendon here. Okay, and response would be flexion of forearm. Okay, here center is there in the C5, C6, cervical. Afferent C5, C6, efferent also C5, C6. Okay, so that is biceps jerk. Then triceps jerk. Here you have to give percussion on the tendon of the triceps here, and the response is there is extension. In biceps jerk you have flexion. I have forgotten. In the biceps jerk there is flexion of forearm. Flexion of forearm. Okay, you have to give percussion on the, give a stroke on the biceps tendon. Fine. Then triceps, as I told you, you have to give a stroke on the triceps tendon, and the response is extension of forearm. Here center is there in the C6, C7, C8. Afferent and efferent are also same cervical nerves. Then supinator jerk. Here you have to give percussion on the tendon of supinator, that is just over the styloid process of the radius, and the response is supination and flexion of forearm, because supinator jerk. So there is supination and flexion of forearm. Here afferent, that is C7, C8, center C7, C8, and efferent is also C7, C8. Then knee jerk. Here what is the stimulus? You have to give a stroke on the patellar ligament here, and the response would be extension of the leg gets extended. Afferent, efferent, and center, that is L2, L3, L4. Knee jerk. Then ankle jerk. Stimulus given, that is on the tendo Achilles. You just have to first dorsiflex the foot and give a stroke on the tendo Achilles tendon, and the response is the person is having plantar flexion this way. Afferent, efferent, and center are L5, S1, S2. Okay. So now let us repeat deep reflexes. Superficial, we have discussed superficial, cranial, spinal. Cranial, superficial, corneal, conjunctival, pharyngeal and uveal. Spinal, that is abdominal reflexes and plantar reflex. Now deep reflexes, cranial, spinal. Cranial deep is only one, jaw jerk. Spinal, they are your biceps jerk, triceps, supinator, then knee and ankle. Okay, fine. So these are all the jerk. They are known as jerk because there is movement is visible because of the tendon, contraction of the muscle. Now, third variety of reflexes, they are visceral reflexes. Here, receptors are in the viscera. So, important one are pupillary reflexes, oculocardiac reflex, and carotid sinus reflex. We will discuss. First is pupillary reflex. That is first one. That is direct light reflex. Here, you can see here. This is direct light reflex. When you are projecting a beam of light in eye of the individual, what happens? There is constriction of pupil. That is direct light reflex. In the same side, indirect light reflex, which is also known as consensual light reflex. Here, when you are throwing beam of light in one eye, you can see constriction in the other eye also because of crossing of fibers of optic nerve. Okay. Then ciliospinal reflex. Here, whenever you are pinching nape of the neck, suppose this is the neck, when you give a pinch on the nape of the neck, and you will find pupil dilatation of pupil because of sympathetic activity, dilatation of pupil. Here there is dilatation, here there is constriction, fine, in pupillary reflexes. Another reflex, that is accommodation reflex. Here ask the subject to look at far object, then ask the subject to look near object. What would you see? That in the eye, one, that is convergence of eyeball, they converge like this, that is visible, convergence of eyeball. One. Second, constriction of pupil, this one, pupil gets constricted like this. And third, increase anterior curvature of lens. So these are the three changes of accommodation when we are accommodating for near object, that is accommodation reflex. Then another is oculocardiac reflex. Here, when you are applying pressure on eyeball, okay, there is stimulation of vagus nerve, and that results in decrease in the heart rate, that is oculocardiac reflex. Carotid sinus reflex, when pressure is applied on carotid sinus on both the side, that results in decreased heart rate and decreased blood pressure, both are reduced. Okay, so these are all your visceral reflexes. I repeat, pupillary reflexes are direct and indirect light reflex, accommodation reflex, then oculocardiac reflex, okay, then carotid sinus reflex. Fine. Next is pathological reflexes. Pathological reflexes are three you have to remember. One, that is Babinski sign, second clonus, and pendular movement. Pathological reflexes means these reflexes are not normally present. So now what is Babinski sign? As we have discussed normal plantar reflex, when you are giving a stroke with the help of pointed end of the hammer, then here, starting from the sole to the toes, what happens? Normal response is plantar flexion and adduction of all the toes. That is normal plantar reflex. And what is Babinski sign? The same thing you have to perform, and the response would be dorsiflexion. Either the whole foot gets dorsiflexed or dorsiflexion of great toe. At least it should be. And fanning of all the toes. That is Babinski positive. Now, which are the physiological and pathological causes of Babinski sign positive? Physiological and pathological causes. Physiologically, it is positive in newborn baby. Yeah, this is protective withdrawal reflex. Babinski is nothing but a protective reflex. When anybody touches, then there is withdrawal. Okay, so it is present in newborn baby till the baby learns walking. When baby learns walking, this withdrawal reflex will be abolished by central nervous system through upper motor neuron. Okay, we will discuss what is upper and lower motor. I think we have discussed upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron with our video of motor tracks, okay, descending tracks. So you go through that video. It has been described what is upper and lower motor neuron. So that is newborn baby. Second thing, when we are in deep sleep, again this is positive because it is normal withdrawal reflex. And third, pathological condition, when there is upper motor neuronal lesion. I will explain this thing. Suppose this is your normal response. Babinski is a withdrawal response. Okay, but it is modified by our brain through upper motor neuron. Upper motor neurons, they modify this reflex into this one, normal plantar flexion. Okay, but when upper motor neurons, they are damaged, this modification is not possible. So you have this kind of reflex, that is dorsiflexion of great toe and fanning of other toes. So during deep sleep also same thing. Higher centers, they have lost their control on the lower center. So again Babinski is positive. In newborn baby also, because higher centers, upper motor neurons, they have not been developed. So this Babinski is positive. Okay. Now another pathological reflex, that is clonus. What is clonus? That is series of rapid, repeated, rapid and repeated involuntary and jerky movements are present when we are trying to initiate deep reflex. I repeat, rapid, repeated, involuntary, jerky movements when we are trying to initiate reflex. Okay, what is the cause? Most of the time it is because of upper motor neuron or pyramidal tract lesion. Examples are, one is patellar clonus. Here what happens when when the examiner tries to grasp the patella with the help of index finger and thumb and trying to push it down forcefully towards the foot. What happens? There is rhythmic, jerky, rhythmic, rapid, repeated rhythmic, jerky movements. They are found in the quadriceps and patella. So that is patellar clonus. And then ankle clonus. Here again rapid repeated rhythmic contractions, they are present in the calf muscle when person tries to initiate ankle jerk or person tries to just dorsiflex the foot. There is rapid repeated rhythmic involuntary movements in calf muscle, that is ankle clonus. Okay. Pendular movement, that is when, suppose for example, when we are initiating any reflex, what happens? We have given one stroke. What happens? Suppose we are initiating knee jerk. So when we have given stroke, there is extension of the leg, but this extension happens only once. But in pendular movement, what happens? It continues like a pendulum. It continues to move like this. It moves here, this way, this way, this way, like this. Extension, flexion continues. So, pendular movement means slow oscillatory movement when person tries to initiate tendon jerk. And what is the cause? Hypotonicity. Tone of the muscle is reduced, and commonly it is found in cerebellar lesion. Pendular movements, they are present in lesion. So that is pendular movement. So these are pathological reflexes. I repeat, one is Babinski sign, second is clonus, and third is pendular movement. So this is all about reflex action. In next lecture, next class, we will discuss about properties of reflex action. And if you wish to get all my notes in PDF, you can go through the link which is given in the description box. Thank you.